Annotated bibliographies are an important part of the research process. Why do we write them? Well, annotated bibliographies can show readers information about your sources so they can learn more on your topic. Also, they help us as writers to organize and reflect on our sources during the writing process. When writing research papers or any piece of writing where you're juggling a lot of sources, it is nice to have a bibliography to refer back to that serves as a reminder for what sources you have and how you plan to utilize them. However, it is important to note that annotated bibliographies do not take the place of notes, and writers should keep more detailed notes as they read sources instead of relying on just the annotated bibliography. In this video, we will explain the annotated bibliography's parts, the conventions of the annotated bibliography genre, and offer some tips for writing your annotated bibliography. Annotated bibliographies consist of two parts, a citation and an annotation. The citation should be in a particular citation style. Choosing which citation style to use can be tricky. Often, citation styles relate to your reader, whether that means you're considering your teacher's preferences, the community you are writing for, or where you plan to ultimately publish this work. Today, we will be focusing on two citation styles, MLA and APA. MLA is commonly used by certain communities in the humanities, and APA is commonly used by communities across the social sciences. When creating citations, you want to be sure to use a style guide and pay attention to the details, meaning which order the information goes in, how the information is formatted with regards to how you capitalize and italicize certain parts, and how punctuation is used to separate the different elements. For instance, let's look at how APA and MLA treat this year placement so differently in the citation for a chapter within an edited collection. The second part of an annotated bibliography entry is the annotation. Now, the annotation is a summary that helps the reader learn more about the sources you use. For instance, who is the author and what major moves are made throughout the text. Giving the reader a summary, generally a short paragraph in length, helps them know if this is a resource that they would like to check out. It's important to note, some professors might ask you to add additional elements to this citation, like connections across text or an explanation for how you intend to use the source in the paper. While this isn't wholly conventional, you'll want to make sure to ask the professor what their expectations are for the assignment. The annotated bibliography, like any genre, is guided by conventions. Conventions are expectations that our audience holds because they have encountered past examples of our genre. What this means is that an English professor might have some different conventional expectations than a science professor because they've encountered annotated bibliography examples for very different communities of writers. And so, while we will review some general conventions for annotated bibliographies, you should also ask the people reading your writing what expectations they have. When starting an annotated bibliography, you should keep the following in mind for both MLA and APA citations. So, first off, we want to look at number 1. The page margins will be 1 inch all the way around. And in order to check that, we can go to Formatting, Document, and then see that the top, bottom, left, and right are all 1 inch. For number 2 on the list, we have that the entire text is traditionally double-spaced in both MLA and APA format. To show an example of this paragraph is double-spaced, and we can edit that from the home, go to spacing, and see that it is doubled. Just title your page Annotated Bibliography and have it centered. So let's pretend that this is a whole new document. I have the Annotated Bib centered, following Times New Roman, font size 12. And then number 4 says that we do not put an extra space between the citation and the annotation paragraph. So as you can see, under Annotated Bibliography, we go right into our citation, and then it flows right into the annotation. There's no extra space. This is all consistent double spacing between the two. When we move into a new citation, though, we do put an extra space, so we know that there's a difference between the two. Now, the 5th note is that citations use what are called hanging indents. In other words, while the first line of the citation isn't indented at all, every line after that first is indented. And we see that here with this citation of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre citation, where these two lines are indeed indented. where when we flow into the annotation, there is no indentation. So to show you how to do this, you would highlight, go to Formatting, Paragraph, and under Special, you have the option between doing hanging, none, which is normally what it is, but we want to keep it as a hanging indentation. Sometimes it might not appear like a hanging indent, as you can see with this citation. However, that is okay, and that does not mean that you need to put an extra space. Going into 6, your sources should be ordered in alphabetical order based on the first letter that appears in the citation. So that means even if there is no author, you're still going to be comparing the first letter of the title to that of another author. So Bronte in this citation comes before Jane in the alphabet, and so that's why that one is listed first. So, to see examples of different types of citations, I suggest that you should go to the Bedford online book that you should have access to since you are required to take E&C 2135 here at FSU. And you can find that on page 310, the authors actually break down how to create a bibliography, showing examples of citation style and then also like their idea of how the annotation should look. But to look specifically at different citations, we could go to page 374, and this will actually break down all the different MLA style citation works for in-text and then also works cited. And so when you write your annotated bibliography, as you can see in the example we've been working on, that this citation is the same citation you would see in a works cited for MLA or a reference page for APA. So they give us different examples of how to handle in-text citation and then also breaking down the order that things should be listed, if things should be italicized such as titles, if you should include page numbers, and what have you. And so for FSU, I know that we're required sometimes to use databases to find sources, and they actually show us within this book how to do that. And if you have any further questions about citations, I suggest looking through the book. You can also see APA style on page 391, and they break down the same idea that's going on. Or you can always go to PurdueOwl.com, and they're very helpful as well. But I highly suggest that you rely on the textbook, since this is what your teachers teaching E&C 2135 are expecting to see. For many people, writing an annotated bibliography serves the purpose of meeting a class requirement. But this is a resource that is meant to inform your readers and also act as a map as you tackle writing your paper. So we have two kinds of sources. We have primary and we have secondary. Your primary source is your grounding evidence that you will most likely rely on the most. If you are writing a paper, for example, about the patriarchal evidence in Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre, then that text will serve as your primary source. Your secondary source would be supporting material that helps create credibility and provides explanation for the claims you make in the paper. For example, this can take the shape of a database article that criticizes the male gaze that influences some aspects of Jane Eyre, or maybe even a movie adaptation of Jane Eyre directed by Man Del Pert in 1970. The summarizing of the source within the annotations does not need to be an overview of the entire text, but instead should have a strong focus on the aspects of the text that you find helpful. You should include the major moves that the author makes and their positioning on the subject they write about. This will help remind you as you write the paper what important information is said within the source. By including a sentence in the annotation that explains the significance of the source and how it will be used in the paper, it should be easy to match up what sources complement each other and can be put into conversation within the same paragraphs and sections of your paper. This is super important as you make connections across your sources. At this point, you can start to see how your sources will support your thesis. Or if you have not written your thesis yet, then the connections you make between your sources in the annotated bibliography should map out a rough outline of the argument or insight you are trying to convey that you then summarize within your thesis, stating the moves you plan to make within your sources. In general, the annotated bibliography will look similar across academic disciplines and in other citation styles such as Chicago. This is why it's important to ask your professor questions about their annotation expectations and do your homework when tackling an assignment that you have never seen or done before. An example of an alteration to the annotated bibliography is the inclusion of quotes. The traditional annotated bibliography does not include quotes. However, I find it helpful at the end of the individual source annotations to include 2 to 5 key quotes and page numbers that I think will be helpful to include in my paper, or that will help me remember why I cared about that source to begin with. Every instructor will have slightly different expectations for the annotated bibliography, which is why it is important to verify expectations if the instructions are not super clear. Again, you can utilize the Bedford book that you have or any other resource such as Purdue OWL that you can Google online in order to complete your annotated bibliography. Thanks for watching.